Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at Brython and how we can use that to leverage client-side interactivity. At the end of it, we're going to be making this simple countdown timer in order to see how all of that plugs together. So you're probably asking yourself, what exactly is Brython? And as you can see on the website, it's just a Python 3 implementation for client-side web programming. That clock that they have on the screen is a demo where it's running Python to actually animate the clock. And we can see that they have a massive list of demos that we can take a look at. So we can do things like displaying an alert box. Hello. You can see how simple it actually is. So instead of importing a script that's JavaScript, we would write this stuff as Python. And you can see by the code that it's just very simple Python stuff. It does map in philosophy to how JavaScript would handle something like an event listener where we're binding it to a button. So we can define functions and we can pair them with buttons, stuff like that. So insert before an element, we can click on here and it's just going to keep inserting stuff before that element. And we can see that we're using the ID in order to find the thing that we're trying to interact with. So I put together this simple demo just so we can see what's going on, and we can click me. It will add this text to this button down here, to this div. And as you can see on the right, the HTML is pretty basic. We just have the body, a div, and button, and a paragraph that we add text to. So the way this works is that we import Brython as your typical script. We can either do that locally or through a CDN like I'm doing here. And then in order to run it, I think they just changed this on the most recent API, but the idea is that you on load of the body, on load, we instantiate Brython. And beyond that, everything else would function pretty much the same way you would import scripts in JavaScript. So here at the bottom, I just have this simple script of type text Python. We import the document object from the browser library, which is probably the main one you're going to be using. We are going to add an event listener to the button by looking it up as if it was a dictionary, which is essentially what it is, right? The document object model stands for document object, basically just a dictionary that we can query items from. There are other ways to do it, but this is the simplest way. And then we have all these different types of events or functions that we can do depending on the element, same as you would in JavaScript. In this case, we're using the click event and we're mapping that to the greet function. And we can change the text to hello Brython when we click it. So if I click it, and I'm just resetting a few times just so you can see it in action. Pretty simple. There's not a lot going on. There's not necessarily anything out of the ordinary. If you're a JavaScript developer, this is absolutely nothing new to you. But if you're somebody who is a Python developer, then this is an easy way to do that. So that's essentially how you get some interactivity going. Okay, so I've gone ahead and swapped out the other index.html with this Clock.html in order to see how the clock timer thing is actually working. So the actual HTML is fairly basic. We have the same Brython imports. We are importing Tailwind. There's a bit of an odd mix of CSS, regular CSS, and Tailwind CSS, just because I kind of cobbled this together with ChatGPT the other day, tested something out. So it's a little weird. It's not going to matter for the sake of the Brython functionality. In order to better understand what's going on in the Python side of things, let's take a quick look at how the elements are set up. So we have this ID of timer for the actual timer text. We have a button, and then we have this at the bottom, which is just to set the time. So it's a basic number input and then the denomination for whether it's hours or whatever. And then we have another button for actually doing that. So we have two buttons, we have a few inputs. It's relatively simple. We are doing things a little bit differently, and we are importing our script from a separate file. Since this is Flask, we're using the URL for static, and then the name of the file is actually Script.py. So if we take a look at, we have this static and then Script.py, and this lets us use this file as just an ordinary Python file. So things like Python linting or autocompletion, that sort of stuff is going to work as expected because it's just a Python file. First, we're going to import document and timer from browser. Timer is the actual thing that's going to do the counting, and then document is just our DOM, essentially. The next thing we're going to do is add a simple state object or a simple state dictionary in order to know whether the thing is running or not, or what the current value is. If you've ever done anything with React, it's kind of like a pseudo use state kind of thing. So next, we're going to find some of those elements that were defined in the HTML. So timer element, circle container, content div, that sort of stuff. And you can see that we're doing it in a few different ways. These are the different kinds of selectors that we can actually use. So this one's using the ID to get the timer element, but then we're using a CSS selector in order to get the circle container by class. We're also going to do the same thing. So select one, select the first one to get the content div. Using IDs, again, we're going to get the timer input section, which is the thing on the bottom left with the time. Next, we're defining the helper function that's actually going to format the time a little bit bit better. So the next thing we have is this little function that ChatGPT came up with for formatting the time. It's a little bit redundant. We probably could have used something like date time, but this works. So this next function is the one that will be doing the updating of the actual initial value for our timer. Now, some of this is a little bit redundant. Like I said, this I put together with ChatGPT. So for example, here we're finding the actual timer input value, where above we also actually found the whole section. I left it in because it's a good way to see how if you do need to find separate elements in separate sections, this is more or less what that would look like. So we have the time unit value, we have the timer input value, and we're pulling that from these input fields. And the next thing we do is actually do some basic conversion from minutes to seconds, that sort of stuff, and then format that and change the inner text of this element over here to that number. Now, this next one is the actual toggling of the timer. This is essentially our event loop, if you want to think about it that way. This is what's checking to make sure that the timer's running. You can see that we're hooking into that state object at the top, getting the timer running. So this thing here to check if it's actually running at all. And then if it is running, then we clear the current state of interval. Okay, so I just noticed, I think this is actually backwards, because if it is running, it shouldn't say start, but we will pretend that that is how it's a bug, not a feature. So we're good. But you can see that this is how we would remove classes. So the active class is the one that actually has the animation, the glowing thing that and we can remove it or add with this sort of functionality. We could also select, for example, the button, and we're going to change the button to start. The next thing we do is if it's not running, then we're actually doing the countdown. Timer value minus equals 1, and then we make sure that we format it and send that to the inner text element. And then if it's less than or equal to 0, we're going to make sure that it all stops and we go back to start. And then the next thing is at the end that we basically toggle the state from what it was. So when we click on the button, we haven't attached it to anything yet. That's this next part I just pasted. So we find the button for the toggle timer and we actually do that. So this is the start button here. And then the set timer value is going to be this button down here. So you can see that these two things, now if I refresh the page and set this to 10 seconds, I'll set the timer and it runs through what we saw up here. So it's taking that number, it's doing some math, it's making sure that it formats it the right way. And now we have that here. And when we click on start, it's going to run through here and it shows that, for example, right now it's false. So it would start on this side here. So if we click start, it's going to go through and, -1, do all this stuff. And that's essentially how that works. So count it down. So if we want to do it again, then we can click on start. That's a bug. That shouldn't do that. It's fine. Whatever. It's a demo. But hopefully that gives you an idea of just how all this stuff kind of fits together. If you take a look at the Brython demos, there's a plethora of other things you can do using local storage. But the main thing I think most of the interactivity is going to be is just click this button, open this window, this modal, this drop down, move something over, that sort of stuff. And I feel like this covers most of that. You can also go to Mozilla. I will link this in the description below. And this is all the other kinds of events and sorts of things that you can interact with that are technically part of the JavaScript API, but it's being wrapped. And this is going to play into a lot of the HTML stuff, because if you are having the need to do additional interactivity that's not coming from the server, then it's something that you can augment with Brython to pair it with HTML in order to get this happy union of client-side interactivity without going overboard with, JavaScript coding or frameworks or anything. And then the server-side HTML that's coming back, that's being rendered with something like Jinja, whatever the equivalent is in Rust or Go or whatever it is. The Brython API, you can see that it loads very snappy. If I refresh the page, it doesn't really take too much time to load. I'm pretty sure I have cache off. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up here, but I'll put the code up so you guys can take a closer look at it. You'll have both the index.html and the clock.html. All right, so hopefully this gave you an idea of how to do some more fun things inside of the browser without needing to use JavaScript. I feel like anytime we can avoid JavaScript is a good day. But that's it for me, and I will check you guys out on the next video.